Hi everyone, we're going to keep going with Under Wildwood by Colin Meloy. Chapter 4, The Corporal's Story. Prue? Prue? Wind. The rustle of leaves. Prue McKeel, can you hear me? It was a woman's voice, a voice that Prue recognized, but only slightly. It was like hearing the sound of a familiar song over the loud thrum of a noisy restaurant. The voice made her think of safety, and cell mitosis, and patchouli. It was the voice of Darla Thenis, her life science teacher. "Are you okay?" asked Darla, her face blocking the dark sky. Prue groaned. "I think so," she managed to say. The teacher helped Prue to a seated position on the snowy ground. Prue's legs felt numb. Her pants were icy cold and wet and clung tenaciously to her legs. She guessed she hadn't been lying there long. The day didn't seem much progressed. She began to piece together the events that led to her passing out. The walk to the bluff, and then the noise. But she'd seen something, hadn't she? Something startling. It came back to her in a sharp vision, the black fox. And then the screaming, deafening hiss. Prue craned her neck to look over the precipice of the bluff and scanned the ground below. The fox was gone. She looked over at Miss Thenis. "What are you doing here?" Prue asked. "I'd ask you the same," replied the teacher, rubbing her bare hands together. The tips of her fingernails were black with mud. "Interesting place to come walking." She searched the horizon. "Just having a nice gander at the impassable wilderness?" "I was just wandering," said Prue, "and then She paused, unsure of how much she should reveal to her teacher. She hadn't mentioned anything of the plant's voices to anyone. She was sure she'd be seen as a lunatic. "And I just became really lightheaded." "It's been a tough day," said Miss Thenis, standing up from her squatted position. There were bits of dead grass clinging to her skirt, and she wiped them away before she offered her hand to Prue. "Come on, I'll buy you a steamed milk. You need to warm up." They made their way to the coffee shop on Lombard and slid into the opposing chairs of a table at the front window. The server brought a cappuccino for Darla. The steam from a mug of honey-sweetened milk warmed the air in front of Prue. They talked for a while about the snow, the dreary Portland winters. Darla sketched out her childhood for Prue, her love for books and music, her military dad who kept moving the family around. She talked about being a real hippie in high school and how she followed some jam band across the country selling hemp jewelry in the parking lot during the shows. "Do you like music?" asked Darla. "Yeah, I like some bands. I don't know, I'm kind of nerdy when it comes to music. Like, I've recently started listening to a lot of Cajun stuff. Do you know it?" "Like accordion music?" "Yeah," said Prue, feeling herself blush. "Wow, kid," said Darla, taking a hit off her coffee. "You are nerdy." They shared a fit of laughter together, which died away to a calm silence. They both looked out the window and watched the cars shushing by. A man struggled to open a newspaper box. Prue turned her head to watch her teacher across the table silently. The woman raised her mug to her lips with an almost inhuman grace. The truth of the matter was that Prue had long kept the secret of her adventures in the impassable wilderness from her outsider peers, only ever speaking of the harrowing events that unfolded there to her mother and father, who tended to greet mention of the place with a saddened frown. The entire incident only dredged up memories of lost children and sleepless nights for them. Mac ended up being the best and only confidant for her, someone who would appear to listen without judgment as she wondered what events continued to transpire beyond the wooded wall. and he was barely receptive, babbling "pooh" every time she took a pause in her speaking. It often occurred to Prue that it was a tremendous weight to be carrying about. She longed to share her secret with the world. As if reading Prue's mind, Darla set down her mug and fixed her companion with a look of wide-eyed confidence. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked. Prue knew she was speaking of the impassable wilderness, though she thought it was too weird how matched their thinking was. "About what?" she asked. "The impassable wilderness. Like, what's beyond it?" "I guess so." Prue could feel her heartbeat speeding up. "I used to hang with these kids back when I was just out of high school. My parents lived in Hillsboro, and we used to stand at the edge of the IW and just stare and wonder. Just like you were doing, I suppose, back on the bluff there. This old boyfriend of mine, he was a little loony. He used to swear up and down that he'd seen things in the trees. Like animals, but ones that walked upright. He even said that one tried to talk to him once." She waved her hand dismissively, miming the boyfriend's crazy mental state. Prue couldn't take it anymore. "Can I tell you something?" she asked finally. Darla looked at Prue quizzically. "Yeah, sure." "This is going to sound really weird, I'm warning you." "That's okay. And you're the first to hear this, other than my parents." "That's what teachers are for, Prue." A deep breath. "I've been in there." Darla's eyes widened. "Into the impassable wilderness." "Really?" "Yeah," said Prue, "and you wouldn't believe what happened." Prue felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. A blast of hot air greeted Curtis as he walked into the enormous hall, and his glasses immediately fogged up. He stumbled forward a few steps, feeling the stone floor beneath his boots until he stepped on something soft. "Ow!" came a voice from below him. It was Septimus. "Watch where you're walking." "Sorry," said Curtis, yanking the glasses from his face. He opened his coat and began wiping the lenses clean with the hem of his shirt. His vision was intensely blurred without his glasses on, but even so, he could see that a massive conflagration, another word I need to look up. His vision was intensely blurred without his glasses on, but even so, he could see that a massive conflagration in a central fire pit provided the long hall its warmth and light. It glowed in the center of the room like a sun. He could make out the misty silhouettes of figures around the fire. They began to move toward him. He fed his cleaned glasses back onto the bridge of his nose. What he saw made him smile. "Iphigenia!" he said, recognizing the approaching figures. "Mr. Fox!" "Hello, Curtis," said the fox, a toothpick hanging jauntily from his teeth. He stuck out a red paw, and Curtis shook it happily. Iphigenia watched the exchange, and when Curtis turned to her, she grasped him by the shoulders. Her gray hair hung straw-like to touch the rough weave of her sackcloth robe. Her eyes, mottled green and deep, quickly sized him up. "I say you've grown a bit since I last saw you, Bandit Curtis," she said, "but how can that be?" He felt a hearty slap on his back. Brendan stood behind him, smiling. "That's what a few months of rigorous bandit training will do to a lad." "Welcome to our province, Bandit King," said Iphigenia, her eyes still searching Curtis's. When she appeared satisfied, she turned to Brendan and bowed. Said Sterling Fox gruffly. "If my grandfather Chester had lived to see this day. Wildwood bandits in North Wood." The slightest wisp of a smile played on his face. Indeed, exclaimed Brendan, his arms akimbo. He made a show of surveying the interior of the long hall. Hope you made a careful log of all the valuables that you've got stashed about. He said, I don't intend to rob you blind, but I can't speak for my comrade here. He nudged Curtis playfully. An ace on the pickpocketing, this one. Could steal the lip ring from a sultan's concubine. He's joking, explained Curtis, embarrassed. We won't take anything. He paused, then corrected himself. But yeah, I've gotten fairly good at that. Very impressive, my boy, said Iphigenia. You've taken to the bandit way of life with gusto. Still needs help with his horsemanship, I understand. This was Owl Rex, folding one massive wing around Curtis's shoulders. How do you know that? Curtis asked, chastened. We have eyes, said Owl. We are creatures of the air, after all. Brendan looked down on his recruit proudly. He'll get there, I have no doubt. But come, said Iphigenia, taking Curtis's hand, to the fire pit. We have much to talk about and very little time to do so. There was a new sadness in her eyes. Curtis couldn't help but notice. She seemed to have grown impossibly old since he'd seen her last. Her fingers felt like fragile twigs in his hand. They felt as if they would dissipate into ash at the slightest pressure. Iphigenia guessed at his concern. Rationing, my boy, she said sadly, takes a toll on these old bones. She waved a gaunt hand to the surrounding hall. 'Tis the winter of our discontent. I believe one of your outsider poets penned the line. Hard times are upon the Northwood, and we are not alone in our misery. That's what the Heron, Maud, said. She also said that Prue was in grave danger. What's happening? Curtis ventured, his curiosity getting the better of him. A frown was set on Iphigenia's wizened face. Indeed, she murmured, that is a chief concern, but it is a symptom of a much larger problem. The group walked toward the heat of the central fireplace, a circular stone hearth surrounded by a series of low benches. The warm glow of the fire sent shadows flickering through the darkened hall, and Curtis could see spectral figures hovering just beyond the reach of the light. What is this place? Curtis asked as he felt Owl's wing guide him to sit at one of the benches. One of the shadowy figures glided into view, carrying a glass and a pitcher of water. It was a young boy, and he wore a robe similar to Iphigenia's. He silently handed Curtis the glass and filled it with the clear liquid. The Great North Hall, answered Owl Rex, finding his seat on the far side of the fire pit from Curtis. In my grandfather's time, it was a gathering place for woods folk from all provinces who wished to share ideas beyond the reach of the mansion's many eyes and ears. And so it must be again, said Iphigenia, waving another robed attendant, his arms filled with chopped wood, to the fireside. At the elder mystic's command, the attendant fed the logs onto the fire, and the flames grew, licking at the large copper hood that was suspended from the hall's wooden rafters. The explosion of light revealed the true size of the hall, its corners reaching far away from the central hub of the earth. The vaulted ceiling towered above the building's milling occupants, and Curtis could make out the sprightly motion of a few swallows diving and twisting between the rafters. All present? Asked Sterling, eyeing the gathered figures as they murmured approval and found their places on the wooden benches. Curtis counted the ones that had stepped forward. He, Brendan, Owl, Iphigenia, and Sterling all sat equidistant from one another, facing each other over the curling tendrils of the fire. There was only one figure Curtis didn't recognize. He'd joined the circle last, issuing from the darkness like a ghost from the ether. He was a gray wolf, and he wore the colors of the Southwood Guard, a smart khaki officer's coat, all natty wool and brass buttons, with a sash attached at the shoulder displaying the tricolor of the Southwood Reformation, green, gold, and black. The wolf wore 2 chevrons on his left shoulder, which seemed to indicate a high rank, and on his right lapel, oddly enough, he'd pinned a brooch that appeared to be a small, toothy bicycle sprocket. A black eye patch reduced the wolf's usable eyes to 1, and his left ear appeared to be half chewed off. Iphigenia spoke. "My friends, it is dire times indeed. The winter has taken hold of our poor embattled country and has refused to let go. Even now as we speak, the gentle folk of Northwood line up for their rations and hoard what little food they have in their stores for the worst of emergencies. In my time as the elder mystic, alas, even since I was a yearling, I have not seen such a time of despair." Curtis eyed the figures present. Owl nodded gravely while Sterling Fox took a long, pondering drag off his clay pipe. The strange wolf stared silently into the glow of the fire. "Who is to blame?" continued the elder mystic. "I have spoken with the tree, and as yet I have no satisfactory answer. Certainly the winter is unforgiving in its harshness, but I feel I would be remiss if I did not voice my suspicions that there is a disease in the land that goes deeper than the whims of weather. The unrest in Southwood is a poison to us all, and it must be removed at its root." "Unrest?" Curtis spurted out. "What about the revolution? Wasn't that supposed to fix everything?" The mysterious wolf coughed up a withering laugh at this remark. Everyone's eyes fell on the figure by the fire. "Curtis, Brendan," said Iphigenia, "meet Corporal Donalbain. He's risked his life to be here. I'm sure you'll find what he has to say very interesting." The corporal huffed a greeting and took a long, final draw from a wooden pipe clenched in his teeth. Wisps of smoke drifted from his gray snout as he tapped the contents of the pipe into his paw and scattered it on the ground. "How do you do?" he said. His voice sounded like a metal rake being dragged across loose gravel. "Call me Jack." He leaned forward and placed the pipe on the edge of the fire pit. "Corporal Donalbain has come directly from Southwood," explained Iphigenia. "He has traveled those many miles secretly and by foot. His commanding officers do not know he is here. He has placed his station, indeed his very life, at risk to bring us this information. His good conscience has impelled him." "Is this the boy?" asked Jack, lifting his snout to Curtis. "You're friends with the girl, the half-breed? Prue?" "Yes," said Curtis, feeling himself moving forward on his bench seat. "Is she okay?" The wolf went silent for a moment before speaking. "She'll be dead before the evening. Of that I have no doubt." He scanned the attending circle of listeners. "They've sent an assassin." Curtis felt all the muscles in his body tighten in a quick jolt. His mouth went completely dry. Brendan, sitting at his left, growled angrily. "Who would do such a thing?" asked Brendan. "And I thought you Southwooders considered her to be some sort of hero, the bicycle maiden, or some sort such hogwash. Did she not, with this lad here, bring on your great revolution?" The ire was rising in his voice. "And did we not, we irregulars, cut our flesh and spill our blood for your precious safety, while you were all about throwing them birds into prison for naught? And this is how you choose to move on? In his anger, he had nearly tipped off his bench. He steadied himself on the lip of the rock hearth. Easy, Bandit King, soothed Owl Rex. Your sacrifices have not been forgotten. He waved a wing in the direction of the corporal, who was listening disinterestedly to Brandon's rant. He is a friend. The good corporal is an ally. When the room had quieted, the owl continued, Please, Corporal Donalbain, tell our bandit friends who they are. That's the tricky bit, ain't it? Said the wolf dryly. No telling who's the responsible party. Really, I mean. I've got a fairly clear idea, but there ain't no way of proving it. They've come to be pretty handy at passin' blame, they have, ever since the emergency. Curtis moistened his lips and spoke. The emergency? What's that? I spoke of poison, interjected Iphigenia. This is the poison. It's what's left of the government in Southwood ever since you lot left us to our own devices, continued the wolf, though most folks don't call it that. It'd be seditious, they'd say. But me, I'll call it as I see it. And it's as good of a description of the cock-up that formerly... It's what's left of the government in Southwood ever since you lot left us to our own devices, continued the wolf, though most folks don't call it that. It'd be seditious. Seditious? I'd have to look it up. But me, I'll call it as I see it. And it's as good a description of the cock-up of that formerly great province as any. What happened? Asked Brendan, regaining his seat. Nothing. That's what happened, responded Jack. Too much of nothing. Lots of people coming forward demanding reparations and no one willing to take up the blame. Once the working people got over the romance of the thing, this bicycle coup, they started realizing there weren't no government for them for to take care of them. There weren't no government for to take care of them. But what about the interim government? Asked Curtis, remembering the charter that he had signed himself, along with many people who were present around the fire, that had established the temporary structure of government. It's still there, all right, said the wolf, just getting more and more like a congregation of snakes every day. Almost straight away after the Owl Prince and the Bandit King and the Elder Mystic left. Here he looked each one in the eye, intoning their names as if they were only words from a storybook. Folks in the government got down to what they knew best, backstabbing and palm-greasing. Suddenly so-and-so weren't so patriotic as he was before, according to folks in the mansion. Then this so-and-so counters by saying that at least he weren't the one taking bribes on those poppy beer shipments or what have you, which invites another so-and-so to discredit the lot and bring all the attention on himself. Suddenly, you've got an interim government that ain't as concerned about running things as they are making sure their backsides are covered. Things get heated. Suddenly, so-and-so's not only unpatriotic, according to his enemies, but he's got a collaborator from the old regime, and maybe he's not done such a good job in his palm greasing, and boom, he's in the prison. So the prison starts getting fairly filled up, as you might expect, and suddenly there's a new patriotic sentiment in the province, and everyone's trying to out-patriot the other one. And people start getting all misty-eyed about the legacy of the coup or some such piffle. And now we all got to start wearing the sash of the revolution, and we all get stuck with these badges. He thrust a claw at the sprocket brooch at his chest, to remind you of the great bicycle coup and all the good it done people. But this ain't ordained or nothing. No one's telling anyone else what to do, right? 'Cause it's the new society, right? We're all free now. The wolf laughed a little under his breath and held his arm straight across his chest in a severe salute. "But if you don't be walking around with one of these brooches, then, well, Citizen Donalbain is a sphygist and a counter-revolutionary. So I keep my head low, and I do as I'm told, and I wear the sash and badge, and I sing the storming of the prison and Le Velo Rouge, when everyone else is, even when I'm sick to death of those treacly numbers. And I do all right for myself, don't I? But now, with the law all codly wobble and such, there's hellions on the loose, and it ain't safe to walk the streets at night so much." The wolf coughed into his paw. He looked at Iphigenia imploringly. "Don't suppose I could importune you for another mug of that fine Northwood poppy beer, could I? All this talking brings up a mighty thirst." The elder mystic nodded and called forward one of the milling attendants. The corporal was given a large mug of frothing liquid, which he lapped at thirstily before continuing. "But this ain't the worst of it. Nah, not by a long shot. So this prison, the one from the tune, the one that we stormed to free all those unjustly imprisoned bird citizens, well, it's just getting all filled up again, ain't it? But that ain't a worry, 'cause all the name-calling and backstabbing has got to such a pitch that the real detractors, the real collaborators and sphygist, well, they're just..." He made a kind of tearing noise with the back of his throat while he dragged a claw across his neck. "That makes things awfully tidy, don't it? But the worst of it, oh gods, the worst of it, is the Snod. Synod. After saying these words, the wolf took a long pull off the mug of beer as if to settle his nerves. "The council of the caliphs, religious zealots pushed aside during the rule of the Sphik dynasty in favor of more of a secular society, now back in full force." Curtis glanced over at Iphigenia and noticed that a very worried look had come over her face. The wolf continued, "Suddenly, everywhere you went, you saw those hooded clowns on the street corners, jangling their little bells and reading their tracts on sanctuary and salvation. And when folks have got no food in the larder, well, those pamphlets and all their starry promises seem awful attractive. So then the congregation's growing at the blighted tree, and then you've got the Synod themselves, all hooded and masked as if they are in their dark robes, walking through the streets of Southwood, banging their gongs and swinging their smoky censers, and everyone's all out staring and listening to them carry on. And before you know it, and I swear to this as I've seen it with my own eyes, I've seen a few of the caliphs wander in the halls of Piddock Mansion itself, glad-handing with the Poles and having closed-door meetings with commissioners and councilmen and what have you." Curtis heard a groan. It came from Brendan, who now had his head in his hands. "Their influence is growing," said Iphigenia solemnly. "We've known this to be so for some time now. The council tree has made us aware. This poison works at the root of the plant, my friends. If it is not cut out, our present circumstances will only be made worse." "But what about Prue?" asked Curtis. "Who sent this assassin? The caliphs?" The wolf knocked back the remaining poppy beer and set the emptied mug down on the hearth noisily. He licked his chops clean of foam. Could be, he said, though it's just as likely to be some faction from the mansion, an old regime sphygist. They still seem to have a scrap of power, though they're forced into They're forced to scheme in secret. How do you have this information, then? Asked Brendan, his chin resting in his hands. Like I said, I've made a good name for myself. I've kept my noggin intact. Black Claw tapped 3 times at his temple. Kept my head low. Got a job in the mentioned intelligence service, pushing paper. Tidy office job, right? So what if I watch a few reams of paper go by that might condemn a man to imprisonment or death? I'm watching out for myself. Anyways, they've got these intuits working in the mansion. Folks who have the way to listen like the Northwooders, can hear plants talk and such. And they're just sitting out in the garden all day, listening to the chatter among the leaves and trees for information. And they report to my office every day with what they've heard. Well, comes down from one of them, an awfully good intuit, this one, that there's word of an assassin, a kitsune, no less, who's been sent to murder the bicycle maiden. Seems like a big deal, right? I mean, she's the hero of the revolution. But no sooner do I report this to my betters than they're stamping the thing confidential and throwing it into an archive box to molder away in the deepest depths of the mansion basement. But why? Asked Curtis. Beats me, replied the wolf, and I don't have much time to think about it. Things start getting tense in the office, and suddenly I see another report come through from the Intuit saying something about cleaning out the intelligence office, and I figure that means me. That they're wiping out anybody who's seen that bit of intel about the bicycle maiden. That's what I guess anyways, so I finish my afternoon's work, say I'm going out for a quick bite to eat, and I'm out of there, scrambling north as fast as my paws can carry me. You wouldn't believe my feeling of relief when I managed to get across the north wall and into Wildwood. Pure relief to be out of that cesspit. The corporal reached for his mug again, forgetting he'd downed it, and attempted to take a long swig. He turned forlornly at the empty pewter. He looked forlornly at the empty pewter mug and gave a pleading smile to Iphigenia. In time, Corporal, was her reply. Owl Rex spoke up. Were you discovered? Does the mansion know you've left with this information? The wolf shrugged. Dunno. Managed to slip the gate without too much hassle. Got roughed up one night in Wildwood by the Ancient's Grove. Some coyotes did this to me. He pointed to his torn ear. But otherwise, who knows? It's not safe for you to return, said Iphigenia. You must stay here, in hiding. She looked at the assembled circle and concluded, as must we all. We are the face of the bicycle coup to the people of Southwood. If they, whoever they may be, intend to go after Prue, they're likely to go after all of us. And what about Prue? Asked Sterling. We need to get her to a safe place, replied Owl, and quickly. Where's safe? Pressed the fox. Owl Rex looked over at Curtis and Brendan. In the farthest redoubt of the wildest province, to the newfound camp of the Wildwood bandits, in the deepest crevices of the Long Gap, if you will take her. Of course, shouted Curtis. She should come to the hideout. Even though the prospect of Prue being hounded by a vengeful assassin was making him queasy, Curtis felt a jolt of excitement travel through his body, to think that he'd see his friend again. Hold up, boyo, interrupted Brendan, before turning to Iphigenia. How did you know where the camp is? There are no secrets to the Northwood mystics, answered the old woman. She added, While you may be beyond the ken of the Intuits, the tree knows all. It is important, should you take the girl, that we know where she is hidden. We are all brethren here. Brendan seemed to take in this information with a certain amount of resignation. Speaking of brethren, he said, there's no sense bringing this all down on the bandits. They've not got a say in it. She'd be a dangerous fugitive. We'd be putting the whole camp at risk. She's got nowhere else to go, said Iphigenia quietly. A silence came over the hall. The fire crackled noisily. Brendan deliberated while the eyes of the gathered attendants stayed on him. Very well, he said finally, reluctantly. We'll take her in. Gods know she's saved my life once. It's the least we can do to repay. Here he wagged a finger at the elder mystic. But if the Kachuni catches wind of our camp and comes sniffing around... Kitsune, corrected Owl. Whatever! As soon as it comes around, it's time for one of you lot to take the maiden in. Agreed? The elder mystic and Owl, Rex, nodded in unison. Curtis scooted forward and turned to Corporal Donalbain, who was by now looking as if he were about to nod off in his chair. Jack, he said, what's a kitsune, anyway? Asked the wolf, clearly having been startled from a nascent stupor. A kitsune? Well, it's a creature from the shrine groves at the edge of the wood. A shapeshifter. Shapeshifter? What do you mean? Some folks say it's an ancient aberration in the wood's magic. Some say they're demigods. But either way, a kitsune is a black fox, replied the wolf. With the very incredible ability to transform itself at will into human form. The darndest thing. The darndest thing. And with that, the wolf's words trailed away, his snout coming to rest on the fabric of his coat, and he fell into a deep slumber.